My name is Dr. Sanjeev Ghosh, and I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist. I work in the UK, but I have grown to be particularly interested in the issue of Jammu Kashmir, Gilgit-Baltistan, from meeting a number of people who have survived from persecution from the other side of the border, and also are in the Indian side of the line of control. So it's sort of piqued my interest in it. I'm delighted to be joined by Ambassador Mr. Srivastava, and I'd just like to thank the Jammu Kashmir Study Centre for giving me the opportunity to have this interview with my esteemed colleague. We've just had the Kargil Divas celebrated, and it was amazing to see the celebrations in the Kashmir valleys as well at Lal Chowk and the flags. And we now have Independence Day coming up. So what could be a more opportune time to look at this topic and Ambassador Srivastava's book. Ambassador Srivastava, if I could ask you to introduce yourself, a little bit about your background, and just take us into the book that you've written and how you got inspired to write it.
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh, for giving me this opportunity. I'm an Arabist by training. After joining Indian Foreign Service, I was sent to American University in Cairo to learn Arabic. I come from a very famous town, Lucknow, which has played a major role in what is called our first War of Independence and what the British call the rebellion. That gave me an introduction to Urdu language. And third, I served in Karachi in early 90s, which was just around the time when Pakistan had infiltrated jihadis in the valley to stir trouble there. And after I came back to headquarters, I had an opportunity to work on Jammu and Kashmir issue for a fairly long spell, about 8 years in Ministry of External Affairs. And my book tries to rectify this. I have relied mostly on Pakistani and UN and international sources, and I have used Pakistan as the plane of reference to understand the contemporary POK, because if Kashmiri Muslim in POK or Gilgit-Baltistan is treated worse than Muslims of Pakistan, then Pakistan has no justification. And this is what my book brings out.
Thank you. And may I ask, would you be able to elaborate a bit about the Pakistan and Pakistan-occupied Jammu Kashmir and UN sources that you've used?
I have used extensively, to begin with, the Pakistani sources, and these are the main actors in the drama. Let me mention some to introduce them to your viewers. Akbar Khan, he was a colonel at the time of the invasion, who led the so-called tribal invasion. It was actually, invasion was organized, supported, and led by Pakistan Army. They called it tribal invasion basically for maintaining deniability. The man who led it was Akbar Khan. The second source, he's written his memoirs, Raiders in Kashmir. I have quoted from that. A second very important source is Yusuf Sarraf, who was a senior Muslim conference leader, opted for Pakistan, and later became Chief Justice of POK Supreme Judicial Council. So these are, from Pakistani point of view, unimpeachable sources, and they are the ones who have, told us through their writings what actually happened in that part of the territory. which very few people know. A third source is again a very famous figure in Pakistan, Qudratuddin Shahab. He was an ICS officer, and he served 3 presidents of Pakistan as the head of their secretariat for a period of 11 years. This from 60s to mid 60s. So he had an insider's view. Then I have used also the judgment, Pakistani and POK official documents. This includes the POK Constitution, 13th Amendment to POK Constitution, Gilgit-Baltistan Orders of 2009 and 2018, and last but not the least, the judgments of POK High Court and Pakistan Supreme Court of 1999 and 2019, 2 decades apart. But what they show is, so the Supreme, and of course, as I mentioned, I have also covered the judgments of POK High Court of 1993 and Pakistan Supreme Court of 1999 and 2019. Now, these last two judgments of Pakistan Supreme Court, which relate to northern areas of Gilgit-Baltistan, they show that Pakistani judiciary has extended its jurisdiction into a territory which Pakistan officially claims is not part of Pakistan. This is a major contradiction. They say that Azad Kashmir, they call it Azad, which means independent Kashmir, and Gilgit-Baltistan are awaiting plebiscite, and therefore they are not included in as Pakistani territory under Pakistani constitution, and yet Pakistan Supreme Court has extended its jurisdiction. So these are some very interesting contradictions which of Pakistani position, which tells you about that the realities on the ground are very different from what Pakistan claims in official statements.
Thank you. And as part of that, it has, I believe, on the Pakistan did a census in 2017, and I think they included Pakistan-occupied Jammu Kashmir, Gilgit and Baltistan, and found about 5.8 million, I think, as the population, which seemed to be a significantly more than would be expected for this population, quite a few times more. And Gilgit-Baltistan in particular, which used to be sparsely populated, appears to have a significantly higher population within that. Is this related to that judgment in any way, in terms of settlements, for example, or what some people might call settler colonialism?
No. There's no link between the two, but the population figures that Pakistan claims, there's no independent corroboration, and within Pakistan there's a lot of questioning, because in the POK assembly they have 53 seats, which includes 33 elected seats and 20 non-elected seats. Of those 20, there are 12 which are called refugee seats, which are distributed all over Pakistan. So this is a very strange, situation where Karachi, MQM, a Karachi-based party, returned 2 members to POK assembly. Now, none of this could have anything to do with the census figures, or conversely, whatever the census results, it has not changed the artificial constitutional setup which Pakistan has created, which it controls.
Thank you. And are there any other findings that particularly surprised you or struck you in the book at all? As part of the research and work that you did on the book, were there anything that any other findings that particularly struck you?
There are three or four things which I think for the first time my book has brought out. Pakistan claims, and the POK or the Azad Kashmir leaders claim, that their declaration of independence was made on 24th October 1947. My book, on the basis of extensive research and writings of Pakistani authors, has brought out that the date was actually 27th October. And this is mentioned in the memoirs of Akbar Khan, who was the man who planned and led the tribal invasion and was later appointed as advisor to Pakistani Prime Minister Liaquat Ali Khan. So there cannot be a more authoritative source. And he has mentioned that he was listening to a broadcast of Pakistani radio on 27th October when they heard that the previous day Maharaja's government had acceded to India. Now this establishes two things. This tells you that the accession took place on 26th October only, which is what India says. Pakistan has tried to create a controversy around it, but here by claiming that Indian troops were deployed before the accession, which they claim took place later, but here Akbar Khan himself is putting the date on 26th October, corroborates the Indian claim. But the second more important part, Akbar Khan says that following this, it was decided to declare a provisional government of POK. So that state paragraph of his memoir places the date of declaration of provisional government as 27th October, not 24th October. Why was the date brought forward in subsequent Pakistani narrative? This was to delegitimize the accession made by Maharaja. This was a point, Pakistani foreign minister made in the Security Council, that Maharaja had lost legitimacy or authority because he was no longer in control of the territory, as a provisional government had been formed in POK. But the provisional government certainly was not there, according to Colonel Akbar Khan's account, on 26th October, when he says that Maharaja acceded to India. So this rewriting of history, changing the date, bringing it forward to delegitimize accession, I think for the first time my book has brought it up. And you cannot question the validity because it is based on the writings of the principal actor in the drama. Now the second thing which my book has brought out, Pakistan claims that it is committed to accession to plebiscite, and it is India which has been dragging its feet. I have shown that it is Pakistan which rejected plebiscite 3 times. And the reason for doing so was that there was a full-fledged military operation on to crush Sudan revolt. This lasted from 1949. It was triggered by dismissal of Sardar Ibrahim Khan, the first president of POK, by Pakistan government in April 1949. And this led to a revolt by his tribesmen, which soon spread to different parts of POK. To crush it, they first brought in Punjab Constabulary, and this was followed by deployment of Pakistan Army. Now, in 1955, Muslim Conference, which was the main political force in that part of the territory and which opted for India, which opted for Pakistan, they gave a memorandum to Pakistan Constituent Assembly, in which they said there was mass arrest, detention, en masse rape of women, unnatural treatment with young boys given by Punjab police and members of the Pakistani army, and most importantly, use of heavy caliber weapons, howitzers, against civilian population. And this led to a situation where 3,000 people from POK, who are all Muslim Kashmiris, they crossed over to the Indian side of the border. Now, this is a startling, confession by the main political force of how bad this situation in the territory was, and this is the reason why Pakistan, despite its claim for supporting plebiscite, actually wriggled out of the commitment every time a specific proposal was made. Third, I have also touched on some of the aspects of debate on Shimla Agreement in Pakistan National Assembly, and this is based on the records of Pakistani Parliament debates, which I accessed in US Library of Congress. And there, in the course of debate on 14 July 1972, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, a man who knew UN diplomacy very well, he admitted to Pakistani Parliament that UN resolutions did not support Pakistan's case in Kashmir. Now, this is contrary to whatever claim Pakistan made subsequently and continues to do so. And this is very important to and this was not a one-off statement. He repeated it 15 days later in Karachi. Now, this is very important because, our Shimla Agreement committed the two countries to respect the territorial status quo, and second, to resolve all issues bilaterally. Pakistan soon went back on both of them, and its justification for doing so is that it claimed that the UN resolutions are still valid. Now, even if you accept Pakistani claim, here was Pakistani president admitting in Pakistani parliament that the same UN resolutions they claim are still valid actually do not support Pakistan's claim position on Kashmir. So these are some of the aspects which my book has brought out on the historical background of POK.
Yes, that's actually. I have to say, I did not know anything about the kind of the stream of Muslim refugees fleeing Pakistan occupation across the border, avoiding those atrocities. Actually, and I've not really seen it mentioned. There's a lot of articles out there in the media, even non-science academia, and I haven't really come across it much. Is it something that you've seen in your research, in other papers, or do you think this is something which is actually known across Pakistan or Pakistan-occupied Jammu Kashmir, Gilgit and Baltistan?
I hope that my book is read on the other side of the line of control, because I've given references where to find the document, and that source is not Indian source. It is United Nations. So this memorandum of Muslim conference, which they submitted to Pakistan Constituent Assembly in 1955, in which they said that terrorized by this situation, 3,000 people from POK crossed over to the Indian side, was circulated as a UN document in the Security Council in 1957. It was introduced, brought to the attention of the Security Council by Krishna Menon, who was Indian Foreign Minister, but it was accepted as a UN document and circulated as a UN document. Now, UN documents are public documents, should be public documents. When it was introduced, it was certainly a public document for reasons which nobody knows. It was somebody decided to classify it, which essentially hid it from the public gaze for next 50 years. Who could it have been? This is a good question. I have no answer, but you can make your guess. Pakistan, of course, was an interested party, but it also had powerful friends in the Security Council who must have connived with the powers that be to get this document classified. Have managed, on my request, UN has declassified this document and it is now available on the UN website.
Which then actually brings into question how many other documents there are which have been classified, which the public don't have access to pertaining to this.
I can't really answer that because, as I said, there has been a very long gap, about 7 decades. And I must confess that I was in service and I was a nodal officer for dealing with Kashmir in UN fora for 8 years. Even I did not know this. So you can understand the difficulty, but there's a bigger issue here. And that is that Pakistani government documents, POK constitution, amendments to POK constitution, Gilgit-Baltistan order, these are all official documents. But access is very limited. They are available in Pakistan, but the access is still limited. And interest is also limited. So it's also it's a reflection on many people of my tribe, diplomats and intelligentsia who have been a bit lazy about looking into these documents which are available in public domain, though not very well known.
Well, actually, I think we're all very grateful that you have actually made this your quest to actually bring this out. You've taken on this piece of work yourself. When we read again media articles or non-science academia, it tends to focus around kind of the things like Article 370, all of this kind of the legalities involving the Indian side of the line of control. But I have not really seen any literature on the other side of the line of control, and especially on the issues that you've just raised, which legally, as you've said, they completely destroy everything to do with the UN resolutions, plebiscite. All of those arguments are completely trashed. You've given a systematic analysis of that in your book, which I'm sure will be used as a manual, or is very useful manual to actually go through all of these. But have you got any thoughts as to why this information is just not it doesn't seem to be widely circulated? I mean, let alone in Pakistani media, but also even on kind of mainstream international media or non kind of humanities academia, or even in India, I would say. It seems like you're kind of bringing these out now through this book, and it needs to be known much more widely. Have you got any views on this? Perhaps from your role as an ambassador.
Perhaps my tribe and many members of intelligentsia have been busy. But let me answer the substantive question that you asked, that about Article 370 and why nothing is known about what happened on the Pakistani side. In case of Pakistan or POK, the first elections in POK were organized on the basis of universal franchise only in 1970. Before that, there were elections in, I think, 64, but they were based on what is called the basic democrat system. This was an extremely limited franchise, which probably did not even cover 1% of the population. This was done in Pakistan, but before that, this idea was tested by Ayub in POK. Now, we can safely set aside this 64 election because that is considered dubious even by Pakistanis. This was an election, where Ayub trounced Jinnah's sister Fatima Jinnah in Pakistan, and in the parallel elections in POK, you will be surprised to know that Chaudhry Ghulam Abbas, the founder chairman of Muslim Conference, who opted for Pakistan, he was disqualified for taking part even in this kangaroo elections. Now, the first time universal franchise was introduced in POK and in Pakistan was 1970. The results were very short-lived because a year later the war took place, and there were three developments. After post-war, Pakistan got a new constitution 1973. A year later, POK got its constitution, and in 1975, elections under the new constitution took place. Now, let me start our journey with the POK interim constitution, which was introduced and adopted in 1974. If you read the preamble, it says that this constitution bill has been authorized to be introduced in this assembly by Pakistan. Now, this arrogant assertion very clearly tells you where the locus of power was, that this was not a constitution which came from within, from the people of Kashmir. It was authorized to be introduced in POK assembly by Pakistan. There is a research work done by a Pakistani research scholar, Javed Hayat. He did this, he published this, I think in some German university, and he interviewed one of the prime ministers of POK. How did or why did they accept such a constitution? And the answer was that there was a brigadier from ISI sitting in the visitors gallery. So that explains complete acquiescence of the POK politicians and whatever was dictated. Now, constitution, as the term is understood, it defines powers of elected assembly and government anywhere in the world, whether you're talking of British Parliament or the US Congress or the French or the Indian setup. In case of POK constitution, it does not define at all the powers of the elected assembly or the elected government of POK. It defines powers of Pakistan within POK. Powers of the elected government are left as residuary powers. Article 31 of POK Interim Constitution of 1974 gives a list of 54 subjects on which, and this is the entire list, on which a council headed by Pakistani Prime Minister was to legislate and also take executive action. The world over, there is a separation of powers between the legislature and the executive. Here, the council was a supranational body. It was one, to begin with, an extraterritorial body because it was headed by Pakistani Prime Minister, who is not responsible to POK Assembly, and it combined both legislative and executive authorities, and all the important powers, which included powers of taxation, which included powers over water and strategic highways. Water and strategic highways are the chief resources of this region. They were all vested in the council headed by Pakistani Prime Minister. Now, there was a lot of criticism of this, what was essentially a rule by proxy. So, almost 3 decades or more than 3 decades later, in 2018, the council was relegated to advisory role by under 13th Amendment of POK Constitution, but the powers of the council were not transferred to the elected assembly. They have now been taken over by Pakistan directly. So Pakistan today exercises direct legislative and executive powers over 32 subjects within POK, which under Pakistani constitution is not even part of its territory. It's like the old colonial system. India was not part of United Kingdom, but United Kingdom ruled over India. So it was like, British Parliament directly legislating for India, which was what was happening. And this is exactly what is happening now in POK constitutionally. Pakistan has always exercised absolute control over POK and northern areas, which is now called Gilgit-Baltistan. This is from day one, but now they sit within the compact of powers under POK constitution to exercise powers over the territory which constitutionally does not belong to it. And this was incidentally 1 year before Article 370 was repealed by India. On the Pakistani side, there was no such provision as Article 370 or Article 35A, which they lament. When it was in force, then they said this was not good enough, this was very bad, because autonomy is not a substitute for Azadi or independence. When it was repealed, they said that no, but this is very bad, you have repealed Article 370 and Article 35A. But on their side of the line of control, they never had any provision like this.
So I suppose when there are claims made about autonomy and self-determination of the people, whose autonomy and self-determination are they talking about? If it sounds like, as you mentioned, like more like an imperialistic colonial model of rule.
There are two things. Let me clarify. This may sound a bit abstract, but it's important to understand this. The idea of self-determination, which is very important, it had not evolved when the Charter of the United Nations was adopted at San Francisco in 1945. It has a very faint echo in UN Charter, and the reason was that two of the permanent members of the Security Council had vast colonial possessions. 3/4 of the countries, independent countries of today, were part of either British or the French Empire, and they were in no hurry to liquidate that. So they saw to it that the right of self-determination was barely mentioned in the UN Charter. Now, in 1948, Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted. This was the same year that Kashmir issue went to the United Nations. Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is considered the foundational document of human rights, does not mention right of self-determination. So, when Pakistan talks about right of self-determination of Kashmiris on the basis of UN resolutions, they are essentially being careless with truth, to put it very mildly, because not only the UN resolutions on Kashmir do not mention right of self-determination, this right as a body, this body of right in international law was yet to be recognized as such at that time. So there is a distinction between right of self-determination and plebiscite. Now the second part is that Pakistan, that in independent countries, people exercise their right of self-determination through participation in democratic process. In case of POK, as I was mentioning earlier, till 1970 there were no elections. When the elections took place after a gap of 26 years after Pakistan grabbed the territory, in India, Indian state of J&K, first elections were organized in 1951 to adopt the constitution, and then under the new constitution adopted in 57, fresh elections took place. In Pakistan, the elections took place in 70, and in POK, 26 years after the territory was grabbed. Thereafter, 75, there was an election, and then Zia's coup took place. Now, with that, Zia dismissed the POK president and the elected assembly. There was an 8 years gap between 75 between 77 and 85, when there were no elections either in Pakistan or in POK. When the elections took place in 1985 in POK, People's Party, which had a chapter in POK, did not participate on the ground that they were not participating in elections in Pakistan either. Benazir had rejected, Zia's dispensation. But JKLF, which was used by Pakistan to stir trouble on the Indian side of line of control in the name of Azadi. Mr. Yasin Malik belongs to JKLF, and his mentor was Amanullah Khan. JKLF, Amanullah Khan and his followers, they did not take part in 1985 elections. The next elections took place around 1989 or 91. They were not allowed to take part in elections. In fact, JKLF has not been allowed to take part in any election in POK, because under the POK constitution, no party or individual is allowed to question the ideology of POK's accession to Pakistan. So, accession to Pakistan is a fait accompli, and flowing from that, no party or individual is allowed to contest election if they are not committed to accession to Pakistan a priori. JKLF, which supports independence option, has therefore been disqualified from participating in any election so far. So, right of self-determination only exists in Pakistani statements and international fora. It has no meaning within POK, and certainly not in Gilgit, and no meaning in either in Gilgit-Baltistan or Northern area. Here, if you allow me, I would like to touch on Northern area. We should have covered this point in the beginning.
Please do.
Northern area, which is now called Gilgit-Baltistan, actually accounts for 85% of the territory under Pakistani control. So what is called Azad Kashmir is actually a rump of only 15%. Now this much larger area, Northern area, was directly brought under Pakistani administration from inception. There is a famous or infamous Karachi Agreement of 1949, which came to light almost 3 decades later in 1993 in a landmark judgment of POK High Court. Under this agreement, which was supposed to have been signed by Pakistani Minister for Kashmir Affairs Nawab Gurmani, and from Pakistani side, and Sardar Ibrahim Khan and Chaudhry Ghulam Abbas from POK side. Under this agreement, the POK leaders are supposed to have ceded control of northern areas to Pakistan. Now, this was kept a secret because Pakistan had changed the territorial status quo of the region without plebiscite, which was a violation of the UN Security Council resolution. And this is exactly what the POK High Court said in its famous judgment of 1993, that Pakistan government had violated UN Security Council resolutions by separating northern areas or Gilgit-Baltistan from POK. The High Court ordered that that administration of this area should be immediately resumed by POK government. High Court's order High Court was overruled by Pakistan through POK Supreme Court on purely procedural grounds. No substantive argument is given why the High Court's judgment has been found wanting, because there was none. So, in case of Gilgit-Baltistan or northern area, Pakistani control has been absolute from the beginning, and there are spokes within spokes. So, Sardar Ibrahim, who was president of POK, is supposed to have ceded control of northern areas to Pakistan in this agreement of 1949. In his later life, he went on saying, हमने जिंदगी में और भी गलतियां की हैं, ये गलती नहीं की है. I have made other mistakes in life, but this mistake I did not make. He said he had never signed the Karachi Agreement. So the so-called Karachi Agreement, which Pakistani apologists now claim to be the basis of Pakistan's control on northern areas, actually, to begin with, its authenticity is challenged by one of the authors, key signatories. The second signatory from the POK side, Chaudhry Ghulam Abbas, he said he signed this agreement only as party president. So he distanced himself from secession of territory, which is within the powers of the president, of POK president, not the party president. Now, this shows that both the signatories who represented POK had distanced themselves from this agreement. So the whole thing was a fabrication by Pakistani agencies. Now, there is something more to this. Actually, Pakistan assumed direct control of northern areas and integrated it in Pakistan, not in 1949, but in November 47 itself. And this comes out very clearly from the book of Major Brown, the British officer who led the Gilgit scouts into rebellion against Maharaja's force. He was actually an officer in Maharaja's army, and he was revolting against the Maharaja. This is, patently an illegal act. But even if you set aside the question of legality, it's very strange that the representative of the colonial power is leading the freedom struggle. Now, Major Brown, in his memoirs, which he has very aptly titled as coup d'etat in northern areas, he has said that he handed over control to political agent sent by Pakistan, who was a Tehsildar of Northwest Frontier Province. And Major Brown writes that after this, Northwest Frontier Province took over administration of northern areas. Now, this raises an interesting point. POK's provisional government, if you accept Pakistani accounts, had come into being on 24th October. As I have mentioned earlier, it was actually 27th October, but whichever way you took it, this was before northern areas were, this flag of revolt was raised by Major Brown on 1st November in northern areas. So, if provisional government had been formed, why was not northern areas handed over to the provisional government of POK? Why was its control directly taken over by Pakistan? So Pakistan has taken over absolute control of 85% of the territory illegally occupied by it on day one, in violation of the Security Council resolutions. And in Gilgit-Baltistan, in POK, there was some election of sorts in 1970 and then 75, and in between in 74 interim constitution was adopted. POK had in northern areas there was no such thing. So after this judgment of POK High Court of 1993, which was very embarrassing to Pakistan government, because it brought to light that their action in separating northern area was completely illegal. So they created a Northern Areas Council. Now, people of the northern areas went to Pakistani Supreme Court and demanded their fundamental rights in a landmark case in 1999. Now, Pakistan Supreme Court, in its judgment of May 99, this is just around the time when the Kargil war was on. So Pakistan had sent jihadis into Indian state of Kashmir, allegedly to liberate it, and on its side, people of northern areas, which is the area where Kargil is, they were agitating for absence of fundamental rights. Now, Pakistani Supreme Court, in its judgment of May 1999, said that fundamental rights, judicially enforceable fundamental rights, should be granted to these people, which meant that they did not exist till then. It also said that they should be allowed to form a representative government within 6 months, which again means that there was no representative government in this vast area 40 years after it had been taken over by Pakistan. Now, despite this judgment of Pakistani Supreme Court in 1999, it took another decade before they created an elected assembly in 2009. So, under Gilgit-Baltistan order of 2009. Now, under this order, Gilgit-Baltistan Assembly was given limited powers over 61 subjects. In 2018, when Gilgit-Baltistan order of 2018 was passed, and under this order, the entire list of 61 subjects on which the elected assembly had been given powers was abolished. Now, there were widespread protests against it. Copies of Gilgit-Baltistan order of 2018 were torn in the presence of Pakistan's Prime Minister Ghulam Khaqan Abbasi, who was acting Prime Minister after Nawaz Sharif was forced out. People of Gilgit-Baltistan went and appealed to Supreme Judicial Council of the region, Supreme Judicial Court. Supreme Judicial Court set aside Gilgit-Baltistan order. Pakistan government thereafter appealed in Pakistan Supreme Court, which sided with Islamabad against the people of the region and restored Gilgit-Baltistan order of 2018. Now, this shows you the reality on the ground, that the people's aspirations, which were stopped by this order of 2018, despite widespread protests, that order has been brought back and imposed, and it continues to be the law. And under the Gilgit-Baltistan order of 2018, all legislative powers are now vested not in the elected assembly of Gilgit-Baltistan, but in the person of the Prime Minister of Pakistan. This is a situation like, Congo. Before First World War, it was not even a Belgian colony. It was a personal state of King Leopold of Belgium. So Gilgit-Baltistan, now all the legislative powers are vested in Prime Minister of Pakistan. So even if there are elections periodically, they are meaningless, because elections in democracy elect a government and a parliament which has legislative and executive authority. Here, all the authority is actually vested in Prime Minister of Pakistan, who is not responsible to Gilgit-Baltistan Assembly or to the people of this region. So, right of self-determination in any form, international law or domestic law, is completely absent in the territory occupied by Pakistan.
Well, thanks for that very comprehensive and detailed answer, Ambassador Srivastava. Have you noticed during the course of your research, having all of that power basically concentrated into the Prime Minister, I think you said, of Pakistan?
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Would you say that it's been used kind of responsibly? So, because I suppose that would be okay if the Prime Minister has made sure that there's been economic development and distributed the resources accordingly, or is there evidence otherwise? I know it might not be the focus of your book, but just from your experience as well.
No, I have based myself entirely, as I said in the beginning, on Pakistani sources. So I don't bring in my subjective preferences or experience. Naturally, as an Indian diplomat or as a former Indian ambassador, I would never be allowed. I've served in Pakistan, but no Indian diplomat is ever allowed in that part. But to answer your question, there has been ruthless exploitation of the resources of POK and Gilgit-Baltistan by Pakistan. And in fact, this has very little to do with Pakistan's civilian government. It is done by Pakistani agencies and Pakistan Army. Now, to give you an example, all the taxation powers in POK as well as in Gilgit-Baltistan, except some local powers, sales tax, which is very small, they are all vested in Pakistan. Now, the second thing, chief resource of POK as well as Gilgit-Baltistan is water. Now, Mangla Dam was constructed in POK in 1967. It took 36 years before first payment was made to POK for waters of Mangla Dam in 2003. Now, when the payments began, they paid them what they call water usage charge, which is currently it is fixed at 15 paisa per unit. They are not paid hydropower royalty, which is paid to Pakistani provinces like Punjab or Khyber Pakhtunkhwa for hydro power projects in those provinces. The reason for discrimination between POK on one hand and Pakistani provinces on the other hand is that Pakistan claims that under Article 161 of Pakistani Constitution, hydropower royalty can only be paid to Pakistani provinces. Under Pakistani Constitution, POK and Gilgit-Baltistan are not part of Pakistan, and therefore they cannot benefit from this provision of Pakistani Constitution. Now, this is a very convoluted logic. In international law, you pay for goods and services which are imported from outside your legal jurisdiction. For instance, if UK buys, French cheese or, some spare parts or aircraft from Boeing, it pays for it. Neither France nor US are part of British legal jurisdiction. So the argument that POK and Gilgit-Baltistan are not part of Pakistan and therefore cannot be paid hydropower royalty is completely untenable. Now, the separate status of POK did not stand in the way of exploiting its natural resources. It is invoked only when it comes to making payment for those resources. Now, the third point is that Pakistan's constitution, Article 161 is part of Pakistani constitution. This came into being in 1973. Mangla Dam was constructed in 67. So there was enough time to reflect correct provision in Pakistani constitution, which came into being subsequently after Mangla Dam was constructed. It was not done, and this mistake has not been rectified. So the only conclusion we are left with is that this is not an inadvertent omission. This is a deliberate policy of Pakistan government to deny a fair remuneration for its chief natural resource, which is water, to POK. Now, what is the difference between water usage charge paid to POK and hydropower royalty paid to Pakistani province? It's a difference of 1:7, while POK is paid 15 paisa per unit as water usage charge. Punjab and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa are paid 1 rupee 10 paisa as hydropower royalty, 7 times more. So it's not simply a question of nomenclature. I have just explained to you the legality or the constitutional provisions. But the substantive part is that for the same molecule of water, people of POK are paid 1/7 what the people of Pakistan are paid. Now, this problem is going to be replicated on a much larger scale in case of Gilgit-Baltistan. Gilgit-Baltistan or northern area, the reason why it was separated from POK right at the beginning, this is the most strategically important part of the territory. It touches Afghanistan, it touches China. And without northern area, Pakistan's illegal occupation of northern area, there would have been no CPEC. China-Pakistan Economic Corridor or CPEC enters Pakistan through northern area. Also, northern area has more water than POK because of the 6 rivers in the region. Indus is the largest, and Indus enters Pakistan through northern area. Now, Pakistan is planning to exploit the hydropower resources of this region. An MOU has been signed with a Chinese company for $12 billion Chinese investment in Bhasa Dam. Now, the people of the region are very apprehensive because a dam of this magnitude will lead to large-scale uprooting of the people. This will disturb the ecological balance. This will also disturb the ethnic balance. Gilgit-Baltistan or northern areas are the only part of Pakistan where Shias have a majority. They are the single largest group. So the construction activity, it is feared, will bring in people from outside the region, as it has happened in the past, to change the demographic composition.
I see. And so then there's 2 follow-up questions with that then. I suppose from the Pakistani perspective, they might say that, is India doing this? I don't know. Like, is India doing the same thing? Is it comparable in terms of the economic input and output with, in the Indian state of Jammu and Kashmir? And also, maybe the Pakistan argument might be that there are other opportunities that they're offering in terms of education or infrastructure development in Pakistan-occupied Jammu Kashmir, Gilgit and Baltistan. What would you say to those perspectives?
India provides subsidies to the state of Jammu and Kashmir, and it also provides financial assistance to other states. But according to official figures, the subsidy of financial assistance provided to J&K per capita, it is 10 times larger than that given to any other state in India. Now, on the Pakistani side, if you look at the POK budget, and recently a new budget was adopted for Pakistan for POK for Gilgit-Baltistan. I think POK has a budget of about 163 billion Pakistani rupee. The numbers sound impressive, but please remember that 200 Pakistani rupees, or $1 buys more than 200 Pakistani rupees. So this is actually a very small figure in dollar terms or pound terms, even smaller. If you look at the budget, as I was saying, a large chunk comes as a grant to the region. It is described as a grant to the region from Pakistan. Where does this grant come from? These are the taxes from the region which are raised by Pakistan, and then those taxes, 80% of the revenue earned from this territory is given back to it. So it is negative subsidy. 20% is kept back by Pakistan as so-called service charge or whatever they call it. So this is a huge difference between the situation on the two sides.
Thank you. And are there any other advantages that maybe Pakistan offers in the package that they provide, Pakistan occupied Jammu Kashmir, Gilgit Baltistan? I don't know, in terms of educational opportunity or other metrics that you're aware of compared to the Indian side of the line of control.
There's no comparison. The Indian side is much more developed, and this is one of the reason why Pakistan, and especially Pakistan Army and agencies, drag their feet on the bus service, which was agreed between the two countries sometime around 2005, if I remember correctly. Because the fear was that people from that side will see how much development has taken place on the Indian side, and that will obviously have some repercussions there. So they saw to it that the service, was very limited in scope, and now if you look at UNDP reports, Gilgit-Baltistan is amongst the most backward regions under Pakistani control. With very poor literacy, healthcare, and so on. The situation of POK is better than that of Gilgit-Baltistan, but it is still no match to the development which has taken place on the Indian side. Now, you can judge how bad the situation is that last year, the Gilgit-Baltistan Chief Minister in a public statement said that though his region is used to supply power to Pakistan, Gilgit-Baltistan itself is not connected to the national grid. So it supplies power to Pakistan, but it does not benefit from power derived from its own resources. And of course, there's no financial remuneration because, for the same reason I explained earlier. So in terms of exploitation of waters, in terms of control on strategic highways, which again is one of the main revenue sources of this border region, and in terms of taxation, all these three aspects are controlled not by the elected government of POK or Gilgit-Baltistan, but by Pakistan. And Pakistan gives back to the region only 80% of the taxes it earns from that territory.
Thank you. And what, in terms of, say, the Pakistani side, they might go and counter this and say, well, despite what you're saying, the people of Pakistan occupied Jammu Kashmir, Gilgit-Baltistan are very happy. They're not protesting. There's no terror. There's no kind of civil war going on or anything like that. We don't hear anything in the news or media about their situation, so they must be happy with their situation. What would you say to that? Is there any evidence for or against, really?
There's a very interesting report brought out by Human Rights Watch, a New York-based outfit. They visited this territory after the earthquake of 2005, and they have interviewed a number of people and come out with a report called "With Friends Like These." This was, a comment about the situation of people of the region. One of the chief figures they interviewed was none other than Amanullah Khan, the leader of JKLF, to which Mr. Yasin Malik belongs. And Amanullah Khan, with tears in his eyes, told the interviewers how his followers were brutally suppressed, not allowed to take part in the previous election or this election. He said that for a brief while, a window has been opened because Pakistan needed humanitarian assistance for the region which had suffered an earthquake. But Amanullah Khan, he is no more. He said that soon this window will be closed, and what will happen to us? So this is, something which is available. This report of Human Rights Watch, With Friends Like These. And this is a third-party account of what is actually happening in the territory under Pakistani control.
Thank you. When you look at when you compare the Indian side of the line of control and then you look at the Pakistan-occupied Jammu Kashmir, Gilgit-Baltistan demographics, and you will find that there was a substantial population of non-Muslims in terms of numbers and percentages. We're talking about hundreds of thousands, and then and in terms of percentages, like Mirpur, for example, the whole district, Mirpur, Bimba Kotli, it was the most populous area. It had Hindu majority, 10% Sikhs, lots of non-Muslims. It was a very plural society in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, and it would be today, I would imagine, if it was within, under Indian governance. But that entire population, as far as I understand, has become zero. And there are a number of reasons behind it. People can look up the massacre of Mirpur and all of that, and but really, I suppose what I'm asking is, when you have an original population where the non-Muslims are such a large part, and they are effectively just selected out in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, and you're left with the rest. It is something that would be of interest to the people of Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, because when there's such a change in population, you also lose a lot of the Aboriginal. You lose the diversity. You lose the Aboriginal, the culture for thousands of years. And is this something that they've been made aware of, and that they kind of miss something about at all? Or something that we would be interested in as part of the arguments regarding Jammu Kashmir?
First, the point of that, under the last census under the British for the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir in 1941, the Muslims were in a majority, a slight majority of 51 point some percentage. But Hindus, Sikhs and Buddhists comprised of a very substantial 49% minority. Just a difference of 2 percentage points. Now, on the Indian side of Jammu and Kashmir, the Hindus and the Sikh population and Buddhists taken together would be around 30%. On the Pakistani side, and you mentioned these 3 specific areas, Kotli, Bhimber, Hindus and Sikhs were at least 30% of the population. That percentage.
It was more according to the 1941 census data. They were a majority in all of them.
No, that 51 was the overall.
But I mean the 1941 census by D.G. Rayford. If you separate them in terms of the actual towns, you can count them up and do a percentage.
Okay, but whatever it is, you say 50%, I'm saying maybe 30%, maybe you are right. That population is zero now. Now, this cannot be an accident. This is ethnic cleansing, and this is something on par with what has taken place in Pakistan to non-Muslims, Hindus and Sikhs and Christians on a much larger scale. Again, going by British census figures at the time of partition, what is today's West Pakistan, the minorities were at least 25%. Today, they are about less than 3%. So, this is, ethnic cleansing 40 years before the term was coined in the context of Yugoslav war in the 90s. And the pace was so rapid that from 25% all over Pakistan, by the time the first census took place in Pakistan, that is around 1951, if I remember correctly, the percentage had already come down very drastically in West Pakistan to about 2-3%. So in East Pakistan, the percentage remained high, 25%, it went down to 10%, and so on and so forth. But in West Pakistan, there was complete ethnic cleansing. And they have done the same thing in POK and Gilgit-Baltistan. But the Hindus are not the only victim. Ahmadiyas, and it is an irony that the man who argued Pakistan's case on Kashmir in the Security Council, Sir Zafrullah Khan, if he were alive today, he would have been considered a non-Muslim in POK and Gilgit-Baltistan, because under POK's interim constitution, Ahmadiyas are non-Muslims. This is also the same situation in Pakistan. But the declaration of Ahmadiyas as non-Muslim, or its inclusion in the constitution, took place first in POK, whose cause Zafrullah Khan was very elegantly professing in debates in the Security Council.
Well, that concludes our talk. It was a very enlightening discussion, and thanks to Ambassador Srivastava for that. I'd like to thank the Jammu and Kashmir Study Centre UK for giving me the opportunity to do this, in particular Dr. Yashodhan, and I'd like to thank all of you for watching. Until next time, take care and namaste.